knowledge is ultimately within the realm of conjecture, and it's better to admit that. And a lot of things which are commonly mistaken for supporting justifications are when you've offered an explanation which somebody likes. If they like your explanation, they say, all right, now you've justified it. Well, you haven't. What you've done is you've come up with a few assumptions, and you've argued a few consequences, and they like the way that explanation has gone. Now you can, with well, I don't want to get into the second section too early, but that's but there is a sense of justification which does make sense, and people can slide between the two. The sense of justification where all you mean by saying that you've justified something is that you have squared it with any criticisms and any sort of apparently anomalous facts or whatever, so that it's sort of unrefuted by them. Now, if that's all you mean, then you're not claiming to have supported it. You're simply saying it's withstood all the criticisms. You've answered all the criticisms and the anomalous apparent facts and so forth. And sometimes people will use it apparently in that sense, but then they'll slip back into saying, therefore, it's supported. But it can't have been supported. It's a universal theory. It has to remain a conjecture. And one of the advantages of having this approach, apart from the fact that it's the correct epistemology, I believe, is that it is an antidote to dogmatism, because you're not claiming to have justified yourself. You explained yourself maybe in one or many ways. There are all sorts of ways you can explain libertarianism, but then because you know criticism is required to test it, you are hungry to get criticisms out of people, because that is a way for you to test it, and you want to test it, but you know that's the only way you can really convince them. Whilst if you have what you think is a supporting justification, then what you do is all too often simply present it to people and sort of try and rub their nose in it and say, look, if you just study this and understand it, you'll agree with me. Don't tell me what your criticisms are. I don't need to know what they are. This is the justification. That's all you've got to do is understand my justification. So it makes for dogmatism if you have that sort of justificationist attitude.
So do you see that at play also among the progressives who, when they are challenged, just say, Google it?
You're talking about fact-checking things, or
yeah, often, or just their theory. You know, I have this theory of the patriarchy I've heard quite a few times, and you ask them, well, what is the patriarchy? How is it done? It says, well, just Google it. I don't need to explain it to you. I'm not your lecturer. I'm not your advisor. I mean, I've heard this dozens of times on the internet, and it sounds like the same kind of dogmatism that I sometimes hear from libertarians.
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, in a sense, that is the sort of thing. If they think that the theory is established and you're simply ignorant of something that's established, and you've got to go away and understand that the theory is correct, and then come back and agree with them, you know, so that ultimately it's an epistemological problem, but it comes up time and time again whenever you're talking with anyone. Even I mean, there's plenty of philosophers who are justificationists, and they can't make any sense of the idea. I've read they cannot make any sense of the idea that you're not trying to support what you're saying. They said they just, their mind boggles because they haven't read Popper, they haven't read critical rationalism, and I'm afraid it's partly my best diagnosis of the problem in America is that because Popper wasn't over there, and there's an element of nationalism, I'm afraid, when it comes to you know, if an American said it, we'll take it seriously, but some crazy Brit who wasn't even a Brit was from, you know, from Austria, and they went there. You know.
Exactly. An Austrian philosopher.
Hayek had the decency to move to America, so we'll listen to him. But Popper, he just stayed in Britain. No, sorry, we don't want to know. I mean, I just wonder. To really find out, I'd need to do some social science, and obviously, as a lazy philosopher, I never do any of that. I just, work everything out armchair a priori. But that's my impression. So in America, there's an awful lot of people who they either haven't heard of critical rationalism at all, or they confuse it with falsificationism, and then can't see what falsificationism has got to do with it, because falsificationism is much too narrow. That's only for empirical theories.
Okay. Yeah, I must say I am one of those people. I have books on critical rationalism, which I've probably read half of, uh, and but I've always thought that they were pretty close. Every time I see Lakatos and Popper, they seem close to me.
Oh, well, Lakatos was, he extended Popper's theory to the realm of mathematics. He said, in proofs and refutations, something very similar is going on here. Of course, a lot of things which were once thought to be proofs were later discovered not to be proofs at all. So something that you might think would be absolutely certain, mathematics, later it turns out to be false. Euler famously disproved lots of things which were up until Euler thought to be proofs in mathematics. So, the idea that there's an area of complete certainty that we can stand on and we can use that doesn't seem to be true. We never know what we overlooked. However simple it might be, some error might have crept in, some clever criticism that nobody's yet come up with may suddenly problematize what we thought was obvious. So it's definitely a broader and much more useful epistemology than falsificationism on its own, but then falsificationism is just for science. Now, lots of criticisms and debates carry on and on about this. I'm not saying that this is an open and shut case. That's the end of it. I'm just giving you the outline, and I use this as my working epistemology. So if somebody says, how do you support your views? I say, well, I don't support them. I can explain them in a variety of ways, but then I would ask you to criticize them, and I'll try and answer your criticisms.
Are you aware of? Have you read Robert Nozick's Philosophical Explanations?
I've not read all of that. No, by any means, no.
Well, the opening basically makes an argument in non-Popperian terms for exactly what you're talking about. It seems like he argues that we should not expect to find a complete edifice for a philosophy, but just simply a bunch of reasons for it.
Well, reasons for would be problematic. It's a bit like justification. If you mean by reasons for that your reasons will support, then critical rationalism seems to show you cannot have any supporting reasons.
See, there you have to explain, because it sounds like I have reasons for all sorts of stuff. So what are you talking about?
You can't have, therefore you cannot have reasons for. This is something that David Miller, who I sometimes call the justificationist finder general, because this is really what he focuses on and the logic of it. He says there are no reasons for. What there are conjectural explanations that seem to make sense, but they can't actually support because they're all based on assumptions. So the idea at any point you can get back to supporting reasons at any level, you can't. But that doesn't mean that when you're speaking loosely, you shouldn't, it's a bit like talking about the sunrise. You know the sun isn't really rising, but there's nothing wrong with talking about it that way. And I might say I found this good reason for it. So you slip into language that doesn't make complete sense, or you might do the same thing with the gene, talking about the purposes of the genes. Genes don't have any purposes or something. as long as you can translate it back into something which is really just a conjecture that's withstood criticism so far, then that's okay.
So when you believe something, I mean, we all believe things, and we're sort of making bets. My way of looking at it has always been we make bets on beliefs, right? It's Pascal gave the idea is that we're just betting all the time. Some beliefs are long shots, and some are pretty sure bets. Is that a perspective that you don't like for some reason?
I don't see why you have to believe something to bet on it. And of course, I haven't given you the sort of the joke which captures the truth about Popper's epistemology. The joke is that we used to think that knowledge was justified true belief, but Popper's theory says it's unjustified, untrue unbelief, because with Popper's theory, nothing is justified, so that deals with that. I've explained that. It's untrue in the sense that a lot of the theories we know are not true, but we know them, we understand the theories to some extent, we use them, they have value, but probably if they're scientific theories, like Newton's theories, aren't true, but they're still useful, so they're untrue. And the last aspect is you don't need to believe a theory in order to use it. In the same way that to anticipate something is not necessarily to expect it. I've anticipated the fact that my house might burn down by taking out insurance against that eventuality. But I don't expect my house will burn down. Similarly, I may place bets on things that I don't believe are going to happen, but that doesn't mean it's not a bad bet, given the odds or something.
Okay. It sounds like it always sounds like a terminological issue whenever I read this stuff.
Don't get me started on that. The idea that philosophy is about words. No, philosophy is never about words. Philosophy is about the world. And there's a mistake that even many philosophers make when they start talking about definitions and what they mean are theories. I don't have a definition of liberty. I have a theory. Definition would be just the way I use the word. I'm not saying that this is just the way I'm using the word. I'm saying this is what the liberty that humans have when between them interpersonally, it's what it is. It captures the nature of that liberty. Of course, it's in words. I can't avoid putting it into words, but the theory itself it's like the difference between defining the moon in the dictionary and then looking at the moon. And if you were to see a scientist look at the moon, because he says, well, I'm a lunar scientist and I'm checking up, and if somebody to hand him a dictionary and say, look, just look it up in here, that tells you everything you need, then that person has not understood the difference between a theory and a definition. So I'm saying that what philosophy does is it comes up with theories. These are not arguing about words. They will look like arguing about words with that, who doesn't have a philosophical background. They'll say, because they hear all these words coming up and they hear them being used in strange ways, and they say, it just sounds like a load of words to me. The problem with philosophy, if you don't have any background in it, is you've got to take people into it a bit slowly, and there's often a limit to how far you can get them down, as it were. And philosophy is all about depth. In philosophy, depth is trumps. It's no good having a very sophisticated theory at a very superficial level. You want to get down as deep as you can. Whoever gets the deepest, as it were, in terms of finding assumptions that nobody's noticed before, or a way of considering them, or a problem that people know, that's the person who's doing the best philosophy, who's getting the deepest. And sometimes even when you're talking to another philosopher, if what you say is at a level he hasn't gone down to before, he can be flummoxed. He can just say, "No, I don't know what you're talking. I don't get it," and it can take a long time to explain it. Now, that's why you've got to have a lot of patience. He has to keep coming back and giving his criticisms, and you've got to try and keep answering them until either you realise you've made a mistake and what you thought was an insight wasn't, or he realises that you've got something and he sort of joins you down there with that assumption, and then he's also see what can be done about it. But the depth of your presuppositions that you're examining, as I said, this seems to me trumps. It's one of my complaints about Nozick's Anarchy, State and Utopia, is that it's sophisticated but ultimately superficial. And the people mistake the the sophistication for depth. Whilst anybody who's not even sympathetic in the first place, they can see it's superficial. They can see, where on earth do these rights come from anyway? Why should I go along? It all makes a sort of wonderful sense if you accept this, but underneath it all, in particular, I would point out, where's liberty gone here? How does liberty fit into all of this? It isn't in Anarchy, State and Utopia. Suddenly we've got these rights, and then what you can do with all these rights, and then all these clever arguments within this framework, which I see as being, Nozick is a kind of Rothbardian. Rothbard converted Nozick, and Nozick then sort of picked up the ball and ran with it. But that's not what a philosopher's job is. A philosopher's job is to go underneath, not to simply sophisticate what's there, but to go underneath and try and upset the apple cart, as it were.
Okay, so here's my question at that point. You want to go underneath. When you go underneath and start digging in reality, you're usually talking about foundations.
Yeah.
So that seems, but you don't like the term foundations.
Well, not deeper assumptions. Assumptions are presuppositions, but it's assumptions or conjectures all the way down, like the turtles.
Okay.
The world rests on a turtle. It's turtles all the way down.
Yeah. One of the greatest jokes in philosophy, probably.
Yeah, but actually, of course, except it isn't. There's at some point there is a turtle at the bottom, and that's the turtle that is simply assumed to exist. And if somebody asks you to explain it, you can try and explain it. You can only do that by putting more turtles underneath to keep up the analogy. You're in an infinite regress. You can't. So you've got to give up. At some point, you simply have to say, this is the picture I have of what's going on in a particular area. And don't ask me to like the tiny child who keeps saying why to every answer you give. You say back to the child, why not? Why shouldn't I be able to tell you what your bedtime is? I've explained to you why I think it's good. You tell me why it's not. Don't keep asking me to explain deeper and deeper why, because that's asking for a justification. And ultimately, I admit it's an infinite regress. You just need to come up with one good reason why I shouldn't send you to bed, and then I won't send you to bed. But if you can't, you'll get to bed.
You mean one apparent good reason, a good conjecture built on an assumption that would sound good enough to you?
As I said, it's ultimately it's going to have to be something that we classify as being, in this case, what I called a good reason. As I said, it's like sunrise and sunset. It's we slip into saying these things. What I mean is, give me a reason that as far as I can see, I would classify as falsifying or refuting what I've said. In the same way that if you classify an observation as a black swan, you've then falsified all swans are white. But it's a classification. Somebody might come along and do a genetic analysis, say, actually, no, it's a kind of duck. Genetically, it's a duck. I know it looks like a swan, But when it's a duck with a long neck, and you were wrong. So you never know. That's always possible. Now, so when somebody gives you something that looks like a refuting criticism, what you do is you say, okay, that does look like a refuting criticism to me. Therefore, I classify that theory as refuted by that criticism. For now, it's always tentative. There is no stopping point. The dialogue carries on forever. You never escape from the realm of conjecture to find yourself as you can never say, right, these are all the things that we've now tested, and they're absolutely, we're not going to change our mind on those. That's absolutely certain, and now we can move on. Everything is always up for grabs, up for criticism forever. And this isn't just in the realm of argument, of course, it's also in the realm of empirical science. You get remarkable criticisms like the theory that the whole universe is a hologram, which came up in recent years. This is a serious theory in physics. And they were talking about ways in which it might be tested. And of course, that revolutionizes the way we think about what's really going on, if that turns out to be true. You never know when something really off the wall like that might come along. And so all you can say is, at any one time, this is my critically preferred theory, not supported, but my critically preferred theory. I've got a theory over here I haven't even tested or asked anybody about yet. I suspect might be a better one. This one, I've put a lot of thought into how it works, and I've put it up against a lot of criticisms, and so far it seems to survive, and therefore I have a critical preference for it. If I were a betting man, I would bet on the critically preferred one if it's a matter of what's practical. Now, there's a big difference between the realm of practice and theory. If you are interested in safety, you want to get on the best tested kind of plane as regards safety. And it's because you don't want to get on this new plane that has hardly ever been flown before. But if you're interested in truth, you might want to see how the new plane flies, because but not with you on board, thank you very much. So, but you have critically preferred theories for practical everyday life, but in the realm of discovering new truths, you want to have the most improbable theory that hasn't yet been falsified. Because by having the most improbable and weird sounding maybe theory, you will discover possibly new truths. So so it's the opposite of having the most likely to be true. In the realm of theory, you want the least likely to be true. Then you might capture more truth in the net of the theory. And again, these are one of the many ways in which critical rationalism and falsificationism is counterintuitive. It's sort of building up incrementally, slowly into something. You simply go for this enormous, all-encompassing, really weird theory, like the whole universe be a holographic projection, or in the realm of philosophy, of course, Nick Bostrom's theory that we are all within a computer-generated reality, which Elon Musk thinks is probably true, which makes you wonder why he's bothering to try to fly to Mars, because he thinks it probably doesn't exist. But
but then he doesn't exist, so why not?
Well, no. We would exist. We would exist. And I think even if it were true, we would exist. It just explains what kind of reality we have. And it doesn't mean that morality goes out of the window and life's problems are illusory. It's just that the substrate that causes our existence is not what we thought it was. There are other consequences as well. But I mean, again, a theory like that can come up and has to give you real pause for thought. Now, even when you want to reject a theory like that, you can often learn things from the theory. The fact that you show a theory to be false doesn't mean that it was a waste of time by any means. Usually, the very process of showing a theory to be false, you learn sort of various interesting things.
Yeah.
So it's another good reason why to test the theory and then the test doesn't refute it. It doesn't mean you've necessarily not learned anything. You were wasting your time.